is related to the development from the lung buds or the tracheal buds, right? So developmentally, there is a division. Developmentally, a part of upper head that is completely different in origin, or lower part completely different in origin, but they definitely they both join together, and ultimately we consider it as a single system. Apart from that, I hope you know that this is not the functional division, because functionally we have divided them into a conducting part and a respiratory zone, right? So conducting part starts from nose up to the bronchioles level, right? And the respiratory part starts from the respiratory bronchioles, then the respiratory ducts, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. That is known as respiratory zone or the respiratory part of the this lung or respiratory system. The conducting zone is where the gas exchange does not take place, and it just transmits the gas or the air, right? So last time, if you remember, we started with the development of the trachea. The trachea starts as a bud from the ventral part of the esophagus or ventral part of the foregut. We will not call it as esophagus at this stage, because the most of the structures are developing from the foregut. So this whole is foregut. From ventral part of the foregut, a bud appears, which is known as the tracheal bud. This tracheal buds grow downwards and then divides into immediately two further buds, and these are known as two lung buds, since there are two lungs, right? So these two lungs, when these two buds are formed, they then grow in the mesenchyme, in the cavities. Now, what is that cavity? I hope you remember that we discussed the body cavities. The body cavities are the intraembryonic coelom. This intraembryonic coelom is a U-shaped cavity. I hope you remember last time we discussed that this intraembryonic coelom is some sort of this U-shaped cavity, right? U-shaped. This central, initially it is all communicated. Pericardial cavity, two pleural cavities, okay? And then in the center, downwards, this is the peritoneal cavity. They all are communicated with each other, okay? But then during development, partition has to take place. And what are those partitions? One is the pleuroperitoneal membrane, pericardio-pleural membrane or pleuropericardial membranes developed, which separate the pericardial cavity from the two pleural cavities, okay? The two pleural cavities on the sides, and this is the pericardial cavity, and here we have the pleuropericardial membrane. Then another membrane separates the pleural cavity from the peritoneal cavity. And what is that? That is the, what is the name of that cavity which separates the pleural from the peritoneal? That is pleuroperitoneal membrane, right? So ultimately, we get one pericardial cavity, two pleural cavities, right? And one single peritoneal cavity. And these all are separated from each other, right? So this is what should be in mind. Now, what I mean to tell you in relation to the respiratory system development is that as soon as this tracheal bud is arising, this tracheal bud, it actually is developing into these pleural cavities, okay? Pleural cavities, or you can say that at this stage, this is the pleural cavity definite has not formed, because by definition, the pleural cavity is the space between visceral and the parietal peritoneum, right? So these cavities are actually cavities inside the thoracic cavity, where when the lungs expand in these cavities, then visceral and parietal peritoneum is pleura is formed, sorry. Visceral and parietal pleura is formed. So we'll discuss how these pleural cavities are formed. We will also discuss today the further stages of the development of respiratory system. I hope you remember that as soon as the tracheal bud appears, it separates from the foregut by a septum, which is known as the tracheoesophageal septum. This septum ultimately completely joins. It appears as two ridges. Yes, okay, but I am repeating. So the tracheal bud starts as an outgrowth from the foregut, ventral part of the foregut. The two ridges appear between the posteriorly foregut and anteriorly the tracheal bud. These two ridges slowly and gradually join together. This is known as the tracheoesophageal septum. Now this septum completely separates anteriorly trachea and posteriorly esophagus. Now if this separation does not happen, this will end up in the tracheoesophageal fistula. So once this separation has occurred, now trachea is separate, and anteriorly the trachea is going to divide into two separate lung buds, and then these lung buds will grow. Now remember that the mainly the development of lung takes place in two phases. One is the lung growth, okay, another is lung maturation. Lung growth, by lung growth we mean that successive production of or successive formation or development of bronchi, bronchioles, the alveolar ducts, respiratory duct, etc. Maturation is when there is development of the surfactant, okay, and that is okay. So yes, Aksa, it's raining here too. So what happens that there is development of the structure that we call as the lung growth, and there is development of the surfactant. This surfactant development is very important. We'll come to know, and you might have read the importance of the surfactant as well. So this would be the next important point. So what is the first step in the development? It is the development of the bronchopulmonary segment. Actually, we divide the development of the lung into phases, different phases. What are those phases? Usually we call 4 phases, otherwise 1/5 phase is also included. We'll just come to that point. Now first you understand how the pleura or the visceral and the parietal pleura is formed. Remember that the cavities are already there. Okay, this is the intraembryonic coelom, but which part of the intraembryonic coelom? These two parts are actually the प्लूरल पार्ट ऑफ द इंट्राएम्ब्रियोनिक सीलोम, ठीक है, बीच में पेरिकार्डियल होगा और बिलो कौन सी होगी कैविटी? दैट वुड बी द पेरिटोनियल कैविटी. सो द सीलोमिक कैविटी इज डिवाइडेड इनटू 3 पार्ट्स, पेरिकार्डियल, प्लूरल एंड पेरिटोनियल. नाउ वी आर कंसंट्रेटिंग ऑन प्लूरल कैविटीज. सो दिस इज द लंग बड, ठीक है, this is known as the tracheal bud, which will divide into 2 parts, and these are the 2 lung buds. Now you will see that these 2 lung buds are projecting, okay, they are projecting into the pleural cavities. ठीक है? I hope you know the difference between thoracic cavity and the pleural cavity. What is pleural cavity by definition? Can anybody tell me what is the pleural cavity? Yes. Okay, that encloses lung and surrounds the lung and what is the proper definition? Yes, it is the space between 2 layers. Remember, very good. Ima and some other, yes, Bisma told me. It is the space between parietal and visceral pleura. That thin cavity, or you can say the potential space between the parietal and the visceral pleura is known as pleural cavity. Rest where lungs are present, the other structures are present, this whole is thoracic cavity. Okay. But the space between 2 layers is known as the pleural cavity. Now you can see that the lung bud, when it grows, it is surrounded by mesenchyme. ठीक है? यूं समझ लें कि यहाँ पे like this whole structure. This is endoderm. Okay, we discussed that the functional component of the lung is derived from the endoderm, but it is surrounded by the mesenchyme. Okay, this thin layer, you can see this is the mesenchyme. This whole mesenchyme is surrounding the lung. Now, what is function of this mesenchyme? That it will develop into the cartilage, into the muscles, into the vessels, every structure apart from functional component, that is epithelium and glands, will be developed from this mesenchyme. Now, this mesenchyme is along with this lung. Okay, because someone is okay, Fatma is asking me to mention the difference. See, thoracic cavity is a structure which is present between inside the chest wall. That whole is thoracic cavity. ठीक है? इस पूरी कैविटी को हम thoracic cavity कहते हैं, जो चेस्ट वॉल के अंदर है, रिब्स के अंदर. दिस इज thoracic cavity. ठीक है? उसमें parietal, visceral pleura दोनों आ गए, उसमें lungs आ गए, ठीक है, और उसमें जो vessels and nerves जो surround कर रही हैं वो भी आ गई. ये पूरी की पूरी thoracic cavity है. The pleural cavity is this thin space, that is the space between the parietal and the visceral pleura, which only contain thin film of fluid. Okay, what does it contain? It contains only thin film of fluid, and this is known as the pleural cavity. While this whole, all structures which are present are in the thoracic cavity. Do you get this point? But I hope it's clear. दोनों lungs पूरी की पूरी चीजें सारी they are in the thoracic cavity. ठीक है? The chest cavity भी commonly कहते हैं. But the pleural cavity is just a space between two visceral and parietal pleura. ठीक है? अच्छा, another important point which you need to understand is that students think that the lungs are present inside the pleural cavity. That's a misnomer. The lungs are actually not present inside the pleural cavity because the development is like the lung bud is projecting, okay, projecting into the coelomic cavity. Now the layer of the coelomic cavity, which is in intimate relation with the lung bud, will form the visceral pleura, and the layer which remains outside, which will come in contact with the parietes or somatic pleura, or the somatic layer of the mesenchyme, this will form the parietal layer of the pleura. This, you may think this is the difficult concept, but it's not that difficult. Just imagine that these are two layers, okay? These are two layers of my dupatta, right? Okay? Do you understand? These are two layers, okay? There is a space in between these two. This is the pleural cavity, okay? Now these two layers are present like this, and now lung bud is growing inside it, okay? The lung bud is growing. The lungs are growing. They are forming the bronchopulmonary segments, right? It is growing, and it is forming the bronchopulmonary segments. Okay. But see that this outer layer is parietal pleura, and this inner layer is visceral pleura. Now, visceral pleura is in contact with the lungs, and this is the outer one is parietal pleura. But see that these both are in continuity. These two layers, they reflect at the root of the lung. They are in continuity, and the space between these two is known as the pleural cavity. This is the pleural cavity. But lungs are actually lying outside this pleural cavity, but the layer which is surrounding the lung is visceral pleura, and the layer which is outside is the parietal pleura. Kindly understand this concept. You can see this in diagram as well. This is the lung which is growing, okay? And now you can see this is the coelomic cavity. When the lung bud is pushing inside the coelomic cavity, this coelomic cavity divides into two layers. One layer which is surrounding the lung, another layer which is outside the lung, okay? And as soon as the lung grow and they expand into the bronchopulmonary segments, and there is more growth of the terminal bronchioles, the respiratory bronchioles, and ultimately alveoli, they keep on filling up the space. The pleural cavity initially is very large. Later on, because of growth of these lungs and approximation of visceral and parietal pleura, this cavity becomes smaller and smaller. You can compare this diagram with this. There's growth of the lung bud. There's more growth of the lung bud inside, and there's more further growth of the lungs. Now you can see that the immediate layer which is in contact is known as visceral pleura, okay? And it is reflected back at the hilum of the lung, and it is continuous with the parietal pleura. Now, how we say that the visceral pleura is arising from the splanchnic pleura and the parietal pleura is arising from the somatic pleura? Remember that these two layers, they are in continuity. They divided from the lateral plate mesoderm, okay? And this lateral plate mesoderm, when it divided into somatic and splanchnic pleura, the splanchnic turned on the endoderm and the parietal turned on the outer or the amniotic cavity, right? Now that part which is covering the amniotic cavity is going to form the body wall. The chest wall from inside will be covered by the somatic layer of mesenchyme or somatic intraembryonic somatic mesoderm, and that will form the parietal pleura, okay? This you need not to tell much explanation about this. All you have to remember is that, and this concept is very clear, that lungs are growing from outside. This is a closed cavity. अच्छा, balloon आपने देखा है, right? Balloon में अगर मैं अपना hand push करूं, तो actually my hand is not inside the balloon. My hand is outside the balloon, but whole balloon is surrounding my hand. कोई ऐसा मैं balloon लूं जो ज्यादा inflate नहीं है, थोड़ा सा soft है. ठीक है, बलून लूं या ऐसे कोई स्टफ्ड कोई टॉय हो जो बहुत सॉफ्ट हो. Now when I'm trying to push my hand, that balloon then covers. Okay. अब जब balloon cover कर रहा है over my hand or over the lung, it becomes there are two layers. एक जो inside that is an intimate contact and एक है outside the outer contact, right? The inside contact would be visceral pleura, okay, and the outside layer would be parietal pleura, right? But my hand will not be inside the balloon. Is it clear? Inside the balloon will be filled by air, and that is the pleural cavity. It is just that something is being pushed. Something is being pushed from outside, but that thing completely encircles the structure. That's why this pleural cavity is formed, right? If still it is difficult, just you memorize 2 points. Number 1, that lung buds grow in the coelomic cavity. When the lung buds grow in the coelomic cavity is divided into 2 layers. One is the visceral layer, which is surrounding the lung. Another is the parietal layer, which is in contact with the thoracic wall. So simple is that. And space between these two will be called as pleural cavity. Okay. So this is how pleural cavity is formed. This is another diagram. You see, this hole is the cavity. Okay. The pleural cavities are initially very large, unless or until the lung starts growing inside them. But by inside, we doesn't mean the lung has grown have gone inside. It is actually outside, but the layer which is in intimate contact becomes the visceral pleura, and the layer which is along with the chest wall becomes the parietal pleura. Ultimately, the lungs will keep on growing, keep on expanding, and they will obliterate the cavity, pleural cavity, so that ultimately the pleural cavity is very thin, and that is the space between pleural and the parietal and the visceral pleural. Now we come to the stages of development. Okay, this is where we last time left, and this concept you have to understand. First of all, remember that growth of the lung depends mainly on 4 different stages. What are those stages? Pseudoglandular, canalicular, terminal sac, and alveolar period, right? Okay. What is parietal cuff? Better, Jatin, it is called as pleural cuff. Okay? It is better called as pleural cuff, right? This area, okay, one is pleural cuff, another is pleural ligament. I hope you have gone through the root of the lung, okay? Root of the lung में different structures होते हैं. And what are those structures? There are 2 pulmonary veins, there is pulmonary artery, there is bronchi, and there is bronchial arteries and veins, lymphatics, etc. ठीक है? ये है root of the lung, जो यहाँ पे है, ठीक है? This part is the root of the lung. You can see that this is the area. What is pleural cuff? Pleural cuff is actually a double layered structure where the parietal and the visceral pleura are meeting. This is known as pleural cuff. Now this pleural cuff in reality is extending downward. Let me draw it again. The actual structure of the pleural cuff is like this. Okay, it is double layer structure because one is the parietal and another is the pleural, parietal and the visceral layer, right? This whole structure which is covering the root of the lung like cuff, ठीक है? ये cuff है ना? This is cuff, right? Cuff की तरह ये pleura, and this is root of the lung. This structure is lung, this is root of the lung, and this is the cuff. Just imagine that the lung is covered like cuff of the sleeve. ठीक है? तो ये जो cuff है of pleura is termed as the pleural cuff. ठीक है? But remember that this pleural cuff is quite wider. अब जो pleural cuff नीचे extend कर रहा है इसको हम कहते हैं pleural ligament, जो नीचे extend कर रहा है. Are you getting my point? The pleural cuff is present once the lung. Yes, at the time the lungs are growing into it. Okay, the time the lungs are growing into it, the pleural cuff will form, but it will completely be formed once the root is formed, the root of the lung. You get my point? This area is known as pleural cuff. ठीक है? लेकिन pleural cuff extends downwards as a free space. This area is known as pleural ligament. Now, why this pleural ligament is present? Okay, this is pleural ligament. This whole is pleural cuff. but the lower extended part is pleural ligament. अब ये क्यों है? This is also parietal and visceral pleura. The area where parietal and visceral pleura are joining, that is pleural cuff and pleural ligament. Remember. Now, why this free area is? Because during inspiration and expiration, the root of the lung moves up and down, moves up and down, moves up and down, right? Now, this movement, this free space allows the movement of the root of the lung. अगर ये यहाँ पे टाइट होता, ठीक है, अगर ये लिगामेंट नहीं होता तो रूट ऑफ लंग मूव नहीं कर पाती. Okay, got it? This is related to the gross anatomy of lung, not the embryology. Pleural cuff is the lining or boundary of, it's not boundary of root of the lung. It's not boundary. Pleural cuff and pleura and the pleural ligament, both are the pleural structures, means visceral and parietal pleura. This is the area at root of the lung where this area, where the visceral pleura is continuous with the parietal pleura. Okay? Visceral pleura is continuous with the parietal pleura. These are pleural structures, not related to the root of the lung, related to the root of the lung because they are covering, but otherwise they are not derived from root of the lung. Got my point, Ariba and Jatin? I hope it's very clear. Pleural cuff and pleural ligament, right? Okay. So coming back, this is how the pleural cavities have formed. It's so simple that the pleural buds, the lung buds, they are growing inside the coelomic cavity, and they are converting the coelomic cavity into two layers. One layer which is in intimate contact with the lungs. This is known as the visceral pleura, which is derived from the splanchnic mesoderm, and the outer one is related to the lung walls. The chest wall or thoracic wall, and that is known as the parietal pleura. The space between these two would be called as the pleural cavity. Okay, so we were discussing about the phases. Now, most of the time we tell or explain four phases: pseudoglandular, canalicular, a terminal sac or secular, and the alveolar period. But sometimes embryonic period is also included. Okay, so I'll just to memorize. There are different, you can say that different versions are written. So I'll just draw a diagram so that you understand the concept. Remember that the first embryonic period is at the time of fourth week. Okay, fourth week, say sixth week tak embryonic period. What do we mean by embryonic period? During this period, there is only development of tracheal bud. Okay, tracheal bud which divides into two lung buds, right? Okay, this is known as the embryonic period. Now, after embryonic period, there is rapid growth of the bronchopulmonary segments by dichotomatous fashion. I told you dichotomatous fashion. Okay, D-I-C-H-O-T-O-M-O-U-S. Dichotomatous fashion means that one structure will divide into two. Okay, one structure will divide into two, right? This structure will again divide into two. This structure will again divide into two. This is known as dichotomatous fashion. You get my point? This dichotomatous fashion means one structure is going on to be divided into two parts, right? And ultimately we get 8 segments on left side, and we get 10 bronchopulmonary segments on the right side. Because on right side we have 3 secondary bronchi, and on the left side we have 2 secondary bronchi. Okay, and ultimately the segmental bronchi would be 10 segments on the right side and 8 segments on the left side. So embryonic period is when there is division of tracheal appearance of the tracheal bud, which divides into 2 lung buds, and the lung buds further grow and they form 2 primary bronchi. The 2 primary bronchi will divide into 3 secondary bronchi on right side and 2 secondary bronchi on the left side. This is called as the embryonic period, which lasts from 4 till 6 weeks. Okay. Now the second week is when there is development of the epithelium, there is development of the more or further bronchopulmonary segments. This is known as the pseudoglandular period. Okay, I'm just writing P. This is pseudoglandular period. Now, what is happening in the pseudoglandular period? The bronchopulmonary segments will keep on dividing, right? They will keep on dividing. Ultimately, till that terminal bronchioles are formed. Okay, terminal bronchioles are formed, and this period is usually 5 to 17 weeks. But for easiness to remember, we say that this is 6 till 16 weeks. ठीक है, तो आपको ये ड्यूरेशन डिफरेंट मिलेगा डिफरेंट बुक्स में. कहीं पे 5 till 17 वीक्स लिखा होगा, कहीं पे 6 till 16 वीक्स लिखा होगा. डजंट मेक अ बिग डिफरेंस. एक हफ्ते का ऊपर नीचे डिफरेंस आ सकता है. डू यू गेट माय पॉइंट? आर यू विद मी या सारे उठ के बारिश देखने गए? आई फील दैट यू आर नॉट हियर. ओके, फाइन, ग्रेट. So you are here. Okay. Great. You can enjoy. बरसात रहेगी. It's a forecast. Okay. ये पूरा हफ्ता बरसात रहेगी. So you can watch it later on. Right? Great. Okay. So 6 till 16 weeks. आसानी के लिए कि याद रहे, you memorize that pseudoglandular period remains till 6 till 16 period. अब इसको pseudoglandular क्यों कहते हैं? क्योंकि the lining of these bronchioles, the lining of bronchioles is that there is epithelial lining. ठीक है, epithelial lining develop हो जाती है during this period, and outside the splanchnic mesoderm is there. The splanchnic mesoderm will form the cartilage, the muscle components, and the blood vessels will also grow in that. So as if it appears like a gland. Gland में क्या होता है? Epithelium होता है, secretions होती हैं, blood vessels होती हैं, connective tissue होता है. So this period, why we call it as pseudoglandular? Pseudo means false. Pseudoglandular क्योंकि इस period के during lung appears as if it is a gland, but since lung is not a gland, it is actually a respiratory organ. ठीक है, so we call it as pseudoglandular period. Got it? The pseudoglandular period. During this period, there is growth of the bronchopulmonary segment, there is appearance of the epithelial lining, growth of the capillaries, and ultimately terminal bronchiole and some respiratory bronchioles are also formed. Okay. Up to terminal bronchiole, these are formed, and this is known as the pseudoglandular period. Now, after that, there is further growth. Okay, there is further growth, and this third period will, the third phase will start. First embryonic, then pseudoglandular, and the third phase which will start, this is pseudoglandular. The third phase will start, that is canalicular phase. This canalicular phase will remain from 16 till 26 weeks. ठीक है, 6 हम इसलिए दे रहे हैं क्योंकि आसानी रहती है याद करने में. Otherwise, some books write that this starts from 15 till 27 weeks. तो वो हम भूल सकते हैं. So it's easy to remember that 6 till 16 weeks is the pseudoglandular, and 16 till 26th week is the canalicular. Now, what is happening during the canalicular period? That there is more formation of the canals. What are those canals? Same the terminal bronchioles and the respiratory bronchioles. The respiratory bronchioles and terminal bronchioles will keep on growing. And this is the period during 26th week where there will be development or formation of the type 2 pneumocytes. Okay. Although type 1 pneumocytes, they appear a bit late. Type 2 pneumocytes appear, but they do not form much of the surfactants. Okay. Surfactant is not yet in enough amount. So at 26 weeks, we have type 2 pneumocytes. Type 2 pneumocytes, they will start producing surfactant, but that is very, very little at this stage. That's why a 26-week born baby may not be able to survive on its own. Okay? So what is happening in the canalicular period? That there is more growth and widening of the respiratory passages. Widening of the respiratory passages so that they appear like canals. That's why we call it as canalicular period. Okay? I'll show you the diagram as well, just to make you understand and memorize. I am just drawing it. Okay? So embryonic period, pseudoglandular period, and canalicular period. Canalicular period, there is further growth, there is formation of the respiratory and the terminal bronchioles. They become widened, and there is formation of type 2 pneumocytes as well. Okay, so this is canalicular period. Then we have the secular period. During secular period, there is formation, more further growth of the respiratory bronchiole, plus the terminal sac-like structure are formed. Okay, but remember that these terminal sac-like structure, these are not mature alveoli, because mature alveoli, they are formed after birth. Before birth, these are terminal alveoli. Now, what changes is happening during secular phase? That now the type 1 epithelial cells are found. Type 1 pneumocytes are found. These pneumocytes, what are type 1 pneumocytes? Actually, throughout the length, there is cuboidal epithelium. Okay, but now in the respiratory epithelium and the primitive alveoli, the epithelium becomes flattened. When the epithelium becomes flattened from cuboidal, we call these cells as type 1 pneumocytes. It is very necessary that the epithelial cells become flattened so that easy exchange of gases can take place. Plus, during this period, secular period, there is more and more growth of capillaries outside. Okay, there is more growth of capillaries outside these primitive alveoli, so that blood is there, the blood is there, and the primitive alveoli are there, and gas exchange can take place. This period usually lasts from 26th week till birth. Okay, secular period remains from 26th week till birth. इसको terminal sac period भी कहते हैं. Finally, we have alveolar phase or alveolar period. This usually starts 2 weeks before birth. Some books write 8 months. Okay, या last आप यूँ समझ लें कि 2 weeks till 10 years of life. Okay, so the mature alveoli, they are usually formed after what should I say? Mature alveoli are formed after the birth. They keep on forming. That's why the lungs keep on growing after birth. Till 10 years of life, 8 to 10 years of life, there's more and more production of the alveoli. Alveoli keep on growing, and that's why the size of lungs, the size of chest cavity expands up to the 10 years of life, right? Okay, so just few diagrams I'll show you to make you understand. I hope, yes, please better raise your hands for your attendance. Okay. So we have the embryonic period, we have pseudoglandular period, okay, we have the canalicular period, we have the secular period, and we have alveolar period. Alveolar period lasts up to the 10 years of life. When there is mature alveoli are formed, what do we mean by mature alveoli? By mature alveoli, we mean that they have thin epithelium. Okay, you can see that there are two types of epithelium in the alveoli. One is these flat epithelium, which is known as flat epithelium, which is known as the type 1 pneumocyte, and another type is known as the type 2 pneumocytes, which produce the surfactant. Okay, yes, this is simple squamous or flat epithelium type 1, and another is cuboidal, which is the type 2 pneumocytes. Now these type 2 pneumocytes, they produce surfactant. These surfactant cells are formed from 26 weeks onwards, but they do not produce enough surfactant. Okay, so can you tell me when enough surfactant is produced so that the baby can survive after birth? 35 weeks onwards. Okay, usually it is said that last 2 weeks. Okay, last 2 weeks of birth means 35-36 weeks there is more release of the surfactant, and now the baby can survive. Okay, but it starts producing from 26 weeks. तो अगर 35 वीक से पहले जो बेबी बॉर्न होगा उसको हमें एडिशनल सपोर्ट देनी पड़ेगी. We have to give them prostaglandin so that surfactant is produced. Okay, so and if the baby is born and we are not giving any supportive therapy, there will be collapse of the alveoli and the baby will not survive, what we call as ARDS, right? Beta, since I have received your message, Maria, you can raise your hand, I think, or send a text to Mr. Tohib directly. Okay. So what is blood-air barrier? This is formed during the last phase. Okay. During the secular phase, the blood-air barrier forms. Now, what do we mean by blood-air barrier? This is a barrier between wall of the alveoli and the endothelium of the capillaries, and it should be very thin. It is composed of the squamous epithelium of the alveoli, basement membrane of the alveoli, then basement membrane of the endothelium, and the simple squamous cell of the endothelium. Okay, these two layer thick plus two basement membrane form the blood-air barrier. This is blood from where the carbon dioxide will come, and this is the air from where the oxygen will enter into the blood. So this is known as blood-air barrier. This is a barrier between alveoli and the endothelial capillaries. endothelium of the capillaries where the gas exchange is taking place. Okay, so this alveolar phase is responsible for more production of the alveoli, growth of the alveoli, which happens or starts from last 2 weeks up till 10 years of life. Okay, so remember, embryonic period is very early period where there is only formation of the buds. Second is pseudoglandular period, which lasts from 6 till 16 weeks. Third is the canalicular period, which lasts from 16 till 26 weeks. Fourth is the secular or terminal sac period, which lasts from 26th week till birth. And last is the alveolar period. That period starts 2 or 3 weeks before birth and continues till the 10 years of life. Okay. So now what are the factors which ultimately lead to the development of the respiratory system? Number one, there should be adequate space in the thoracic cavity for the growth of the lungs. Number second, the fetal breathing. Okay, the fetal breathing at the time of birth is very important, because remember that the fetal lungs, they are filled with fluid. Okay, have you ever seen that we suck fluid while the babies are born? As soon as the babies are born, we suck fluid from their mouth, because during intrauterine life, they swallow or sometimes inhale the amniotic fluid. So amniotic fluid is present in the lung cavities, right? So what is, yes, Mustafa, you are very right. So there should be adequate amniotic fluid volume as well for proper growth of the lungs and the respiratory movement. Okay, these are the factors which are responsible for mature lung. And I hope you all know what is the importance of the surfactant. This prevents the collapse of the lung, because when there is air, there is a thin film of fluid which is lining the alveoli. Okay, now to prevent the surface tension, okay, hamna premature deliveries, the better term hamna is premature deliveries. Okay, or delivery of premature babies, right? Yes, we suck not the whole fluid, Jatin. We just take out fluid from the mouth and the pharynx and upper larynx. ठीक है, सिर्फ वो क्यों fluid remove करते हैं? क्योंकि air अंदर जा सके. जो अंदर alveoli में respiratory bronchioles में fluid है, वो suck नहीं कर रहे हैं, वो खुद ही चला जाएगा, right? वो खुद ही चला जाएगा. कैसे चला जाएगा? That would be absorbed in the capillaries. Now just imagine कि this area is filled with the fluid. ठीक है? This is alveoli. And this area is filled with amniotic fluid. ठीक है, अब जैसे ही first cry होगी baby की, as soon as the baby will cry like this, okay, Jatin, this baby resembles you. Okay, so as soon as the baby cries and there is air going inside. ठीक है, जैसे ही air अंदर जाएगी, the fluid from this area will be absorbed into the capillaries. ठीक है, and this area will be filled up with air. And ultimately gas exchange will start. Okay? Otherwise, during intrauterine life, when no apparatus were present, when no apparatus was present to suck the fluid, simply हम क्या करते हैं, अभी भी अगर कहीं देखें home deliveries में apparatus तो नहीं होता, midwives deliveries करवाती हैं, वहां भी apparatus नहीं होता. So what we do is we take a cloth, okay, and then we wipe off the fluid. जो एक्स्ट्रा फ्लूइड है बेबी के माउथ में और फेरिंग्स में, वो यू फिंगर से निकाल देते. ठीक है, अगर नहीं निकाला तो क्या होगा कि टू थिंग्स कैन हैपन. बेबी विल swallow कर लेता है तो इट्स फाइन, ठीक है, कोई नहीं है. बट अगर इनहेल करेगा तो थोड़ी सी प्रॉब्लम होगी ब्रीदिंग. Yes, this is what I am telling you, Safa. Okay, we need to remove the fluid which is present up to this level. We will not remove the fluid from the lungs inside. कोई इतनी suction machine अंदर नहीं डालेंगे. Got it? अंदर डाल भी नहीं सकते, क्योंकि we have straight passage up to this point. उसके बाद या तो हम right चले जाएं लंग में या left चले जाएं, तो कैसे जाएंगे? It's not possible, right? We have to remove. देखें सफा, yes, nose से भी remove कर सकते हैं, लेकिन mouth से remove करेंगे तो nose से भी mostly suck हो जाएगा. And baby is not breathing, सफा. So लेकिन swallow कर रहा होता है, तो इसीलिए फ्लूइड जो है वो ज्यादा माउथ में होता है, नोज में इतना नहीं होता, बिकॉज बेबी इज नॉट ब्रीदिंग. नोज यूजुअली एम्प्टी होता है, लेकिन थोड़े से सक्शन मशीन हम नोज में माउथ में डाल के निकाल लेते हैं. दैट इज वेरी स्मॉल अमाउंट ऑफ फ्लूइड, ज्यादा नहीं होता. ठीक है, सो वी रिमूव द फ्लूइड, द अपर पैसेज इज क्लियर. नाउ द बेबी विल इमीडिएटली क्राई एंड विल इनहेल. ठीक है, जैसे ही बेबी क्राई करेगा, इनहेल करेगा, चेस्ट एक्सपैंड होगी, because the fluid will be absorbed into the capillaries. and the chest will be filled up with the air, right? Okay, and ultimately the respiratory movement will start. Baby will start, breathing in and breathing out naturally. So this is how it's important at the time that the breathing movements, although the small rhythmic contractions of the muscles have started in intrauterine life, and the baby is inhaling